Okay, so what we're going to be doing is some blending rectangles. So what I want you to do is get a ruler, and we're going to make some different length rectangles on the mixed media paper that I sent with you. We're going to be using the completely blank piece for this, and what I'm doing right now is just drawing a rectangle all the way across the sheet of paper. I'm at the top. I'm going to start an inch in, so I'm going to put a mark here, and then I'm going to put a mark at the 9. That's going to give us an 8-inch rectangle. So this is what we're going to try to blend from white to black. And I'm just going to do blue in between. So then I'm going to go down about a 1/2 inch to do the same thing. I'm just going to use the thickness of the ruler as my rectangle. I'm going to start at 1, and that'll just help us stop or keep ourselves from painting off onto the table work surface. From this one, we're just going to go to 7. So this is a 6-inch rectangle. And the point here is just to practice our ability to paint from white to black through a color in different amounts of space. So that's all really painting is blending different shades in different amounts of space. So what I'm going to want you to do is to do each of these. You can do different colors, you can do whatever color you want. I think I'm just going to use blue. I am using the same paint that you all did, so that we'll all kind of get a better understanding of it at the same time. So this is going to be 8, 6, 4 inches, and this one will be 2 inches. And that's what I want you all to do. So for the demonstration, I'm just going to do the 6-inch one here, from white to black. I'm also just going to use the piece of paper as my palette. Generally, if we were in class, I would be telling you all to use like a paper plate or a styrofoam plate as a palette, and that'll just help you mix it, and then you can clean that at the end of every use to save you some time and money. What I do when I've got some paint, it's brand new, I'm just going to move it around a little bit just to mix it up because it's been sitting around for a long time on a shelf. So there's different components as far as the binding agent, which would be the acrylic in this instance, and the pigment, which is the powder. So we're just mixing it up a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the top of the cap to break this seal, just very lightly. If you've squeezed it too much, it can start to shoot out a whole bunch. So you'll see that. I'm going to put a little bit of blue paint here. Not much, because you can't get that paint back into the tube. So you can always put more out. So I'm just going to start with this. I'm going to do the same thing with white. I'm not even going to worry about black just yet. Oh, the white's already open. Interesting. So I did notice that in this paint, there isn't an actual orange, which is fine. You'll just mix either of your reds together with the yellow. It's hard to say which one will work better, Brilliant Red or Scarlet. Brilliant Red looks like it's got a little bit of an orange tint to it already, so I would probably use that to mix an orange. But I'm not worried about that too much just yet. This is about blending from light to dark. Personally, for something like this, I prefer a flat brush. So if you got the ones that are angled, if it was me, I'd be using the 1/4 inch thick one. I'll probably be using the 2 of these, maybe this one as well. It's also a really good idea when you're doing this to have a little bit of water and a paper towel. So we're going to get one of those. to keep our brushes clean so we don't get our blacks and our whites mixed together. We aren't trying to make grays here. So you want to keep your kind of black and white away from each other, maybe even with a different brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by putting some white paint here. I have a tendency to kind of mix my paint on the paper sometimes. And I'm not too concerned about you staying within the lines. This is more about practicing our blending. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get just a tiny little bit of blue and a pretty good amount of white. In my mind, the most difficult aspect of painting these sorts of things is going from completely white to having some pigment. And you'll see that I'm trying to distribute it evenly all the way across this rectangle in the thickness, and that's one of the good things about these flat brushes rather than the round brushes, is it makes that process just a little bit easier. So you kind of have to work fairly quickly because while it's liquid, it's going to be easier to blend. And you'll see that what I just did there was I had a little bit of pigment on this side, and then in order to blend it, I just kind of went back over and tried to move that around. It's almost like you see a line here and you just kind of go back and try to blend it back together. I am going to need a little bit more white. And I'll be probably adding quite a bit of white. We'll be using a lot more white than black. Black is really powerful, and it takes very little black to really completely darken this stuff up. And white's kind of nice because you can always go back and kind of blend some of these lines out with the white. So what we're going to be doing now, and again, like I said in class, this will take more than one coat. So we're just going to continually start to add a little bit more blue to that white, and we're just going to work our way from the left to the right with this. And this will take a couple layers, so don't think that you're going to be completely done just after going over it one time. You're probably going to try to get to an actual blue a little past the middle here, so. And you can always mix it over on your palette and then try to come up with like a judgment as to where that should be. So a blue like this should probably be maybe here-ish. But I try to do this in a way where I am working while the paint is still wet, because that's going to help me blend it all together. So if I get too light in here, I can always go grab a little bit more blue to put in there. Something else I like to do for blending is use a dry brush. So this brush is kind of saturated with paint right now. So it's going to be, if I use this to move these two things to blend that line, it's going to add too much blue over here. But if I use a brush that doesn't have any paint in it, then I can go back and get rid of those lines pretty easy. It's just called a dry brush. So you still have to keep that dry brush clean and pretty dry. You don't really want to use too much water. This paint's pretty thin to begin with. Although water can help you blend, you might want to try it a little bit to see how it works. But I'm just kind of going back in to get rid of that line. And I'm just using just the tiniest little bit of water. Then I dry it off just a little bit before I go back. And see how that just blends those lines out really well. So that's kind of the goal. So I'm going to go back over here and add some more blue. And you'll notice that I'm going to be going from left to right, right to left quite a bit. And like I said, I'm trying to get to the actual blue here, so I'm not even going into the white at the moment. But you've got to work your way evenly across that rectangle or it's really not going to work very well. So now you can see these are brush strokes, so that's something we're trying to minimize as well. So that's another thing that the dry brush is good for. So I'm going back to the wider, using the wider one as my dry brush. It's currently wet, so I'm just drying it out. But you can see that we can go back in and blend that out a little bit. And you can see that the water makes the paint more transparent, and that's why we're going to have to do more than one coat, is to try to minimize that transparency. So if I were doing this, I would also try, so I've got a lot of white paint out here, so I would keep that on here so I can do all of my rectangles, and I would do all of my first coats at once if I sit down and have enough time to do so. So I'm cleaning out my brush that had the paint in it just because there was a lot of white in there. So I'm going to try to get rid of that. So, but now it's really wet, so I've got to use my paper towel and just continually dry that off. You always want to move in the direction of the bristles so that you don't damage the bristles of the brush. You want to keep them in that kind of flat, rectangular fashion like that.